Hi Alvaro, and let's break down your splash. So I see that you implemented some of the changes and it looks quite nice. I like the shapes. I like the overall flow of the animation. So everything seems quite nice so far. So in terms of the changes and what we can also address, or maybe consider in the next animation and stuff. So the shapes look nice. Guess one thing that we can change is the distribution of shapes in a sense. So right now, it's nice, but we kind of lack a bit of bigger shapes after first 4 frames or so. So we have shapes and they're mostly kind of medium sized. So everything is a bit broken up and we might need some bigger shapes, maybe at the bottom, to support it compositionally. The second thing is mostly about the trajectory. It's not necessarily a mistake or something, just one thing to keep in mind. For this particle, I plotted out the line, and you tend to do this with other particles as well. So what you're doing is you're doing a higher slope, a slower slope on the way up and a very fast fall down, almost in a straight line. And when all the particles are going like this, it starts looking a bit strange. So it's not a mistake or something per se, but it's just one thing to consider. So usually if you are going for more realistic effect or more realistic physics, we want to have a somewhat similar slope. It doesn't have to be exactly the same. God. But the angle is usually more or less matching. Whereas here we get a very gradual slope on the side here and very sharp on the way down. And it may look a bit strange if we are going for more complex splashes and stuff. And yeah, that's like the most important thing I wanted to tell you. Another thing is the acceleration here, and other tips would be mostly about the design. So we have this form going up, and then you see it stays basically at the same spot. Then we have huge acceleration here. Then we slow down again. Let me show it clearly. So we have a huge acceleration. We slow down, and we accelerate again, and we slow down, and we accelerate a bit. So logically, it would make sense to delay that slowdown and reserve it for when the particles are falling down. And I'm mostly talking about this hole and the mass suddenly moving forward. So if you look here, the mass goes 1, the mass goes 2, and then it suddenly goes 3. That's the thing that I'm talking about. And then it slows down. So the point is that we have suddenly a huge acceleration, and then everything moves relatively slow again. So it would make sense to have something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and accelerate on the way down instead of accelerating while we're still just starting out on the animation. So that's one thing. That's the second thing. Aside from that, what else can I say? We have 2 shapes here, and they exactly the same size. And after they're the same size from this frame to this frame, and then this part of the shape kind of disappears into nothing, and we're left with 3 shapes with similar spacing and similar position. So it would be nice to differentiate these two shapes in size, or maybe just indicate the bigger mass here. And overall, it would be nice to have a bigger mass at this frame and forward here so that it complements smaller masses. Because right now, as I said, we tend to have a similar sized shapes in the same place. So 3 shapes here, all very similar in size. Then we break it up a bit, and that helps it. But we can definitely have more variety. So some notes on the curves. So we go 1, we go 2. See, we change direction. Change direction, go here, and then we suddenly change direction again. So 1, 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, then 7, and again, as I said, you tend to do very steep decline. But here it matches the incline at the start, so the only thing that we need to do is to change the position of these 2 frames. So the note about these parts and the stuff divided in halves is the same. So thing is that we divide the shape in half right from the start, and this makes the design a bit more repetitive because at this moment everything breaks in half. And where we have 2 elements on the sides, and this makes it a bit more flat because we don't have so much to work with in terms of showing the size. So it's also one thing to consider if we want to animate a splash in perspective, and if we're aiming for more kind of volumetric animation, it would be nice to show that particles are not just going in a straight line to the side, they can go in all kind of angles. So for example, if we're actually animating a splash in perspective, these particles will go to the camera, have particles going away from the camera. And what does this mean? So I'll use this as a guide and just animate a couple particles without much context. So let's see. So you see, now we have particles that are going to the camera, and not just particles that are going to the sides or something like that. So if we really want to sell, for example, the scene in terms of the volume and the perspective, we need to add particles that emphasize the perspective. And it's not always the case. We don't always need that. In many games, we just have to make an interesting animation, and actually show it in perspective is not the point. So that's also one thing to consider. We don't always need that, but when we need that, it would be nice to have this kind of variation. and difference in direction between particles. And I hope you can see that way we have an indication of space and volume through adding just a bit of particles. So you can also make the particles that are going away from the camera, and then they will become smaller as they go. Can have a slowdown. And after the slowdown, size will change more as they go further on the line. And that's just noise, it's not for this animation. In particular, it's just something to keep in mind if you're going to animate an animation in space, and if you have a goal to make an animation that shows volume for the scene that requires it. Because right now, everything is going straight to the side. We don't have much of variation here because the curves kind of always turn sideways. So the difference is that to show space here, for example, the curve looks like this and the size changes. So we start with particle smaller, it gets bigger, and it gets bigger here. Same thing here. So the curve looks like this. Start with particle here, gets a bit bigger here, and it is the biggest here. Start. So essentially, imagine lines radiating from the splash, and we're connecting and this is how it works essentially. It can be like this, smaller one, more steep line, or it may be like this, or it may be like that, or it may be like this. Hope that's clear. So in terms of talking about the animation itself, other stuff, so it would be nice to break up the highlights a bit. They're too similar in size and positioning, and we get a sense of symmetry that it's not there. Same thing here, it would be nice to have a bit more variety here. So for this additional blue layer, I'd keep the shapes a bit different from the front layer. So you see, the thing is that I have this shape here and the same shape in the background, so they kind of add to the repetition. And the second thing is that we have this shape here and it exactly repeats here, blends with the shape here. And again, we have this kind of trajectory where it goes and it falls straight down. So we'll do this curve. So it starts like this and then goes like that. And for the most part, that's it. The splash looks nice. It's mostly about small stuff, like figuring out the design uh, and making sure that it works. And yeah, I think that this adds some perspective to it because it has size of change of size, and it adds some variation. So that's it, I guess. Wish you good luck with your animations and see you later.